All join palms. Repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Anyone here for the first time? What brings you here? It's his fault, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I know him, so 72 comments that are going through my head. I'll stay silent on all of them. I'm glad you're here. He's a good dude, despite what you might think. Who else is here for the first time? So, man, welcome. What brings you in?
My neighbor.
You guys got to stop doing this stuff. Saw another hand first time. Yeah.
She invited me.
Right on. What did she say to get you here? Promise you lots of stuff afterwards. It's a funny thing when we try to get people, or bring people, because it's a very delicate subject of, how do you get someone to this? It's a question that comes up a lot. How do I get so-and-so to go to something? And, what you're bringing them to is something that is really a reflection on your own madness, your own craziness, your own stress, your own anxieties, your own challenges, all of that stuff. And so when you approach someone and say, like, hey, you should come to meditation, it's not always received the best way. So I honor all of you who received the invite and showed up. There was a time in our lives, I'm sure for all of us in this room, where if somebody said you should go to meditation or you should go check out that Buddhist thing, you'd be like, no way. It's definitely the last thing that I would have thought of when I was, younger. So, but somehow here we are. So I appreciate you all being here. Who's here a lot? Keeps coming back. Why? Yes, in the back. I see a hand hiding out there. Yeah. Yes, in the back with the hand. Why do you keep coming back?
Why you bring this, I think, to, like many people do, alleviate any anxiety that goes on throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think to also focus on self and find self-awareness and a way to quiet the mind in either difficult or chaotic times.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want it? Yeah.
It's a gift I give myself because it reminds me that you can have peace within if you choose to practice and practice and practice.
Yeah.
And I have to keep coming back and back and back to practice to allow myself to know what that feeling can be, and then want to give myself that gift time after time of a sense of peacefulness. And it's okay.
Yeah, thank you. If we did promo videos, that would be it right there. Yeah, it's, and the word you said, which I say frequently, is the word practice, is that it's a practice. It's a reminder that if we haven't lived a peaceful, happy kind of internal life for a long time, it takes more than a few weeks to get into that habit. If we've been angry for 40 years, then it's going to take more than a few months to kind of get over that. I know you all just tried to hide out on the side there, but I'm going to move you to the center anywhere. You don't have to go all the way to the back. There's plenty of seats right there. Just so,
I'm not trying.
what's that? Yeah, just so you're facing forward. That way it's much more comfortable for everybody. It is something we have to remind ourselves, thank you, to just come back to practice, to give ourselves that opportunity to just sit and be, because we spend so much of our days doing, producing, creating, accomplishing tasks, goals, motivations, driven. There's so much time spent on these things. And this practice is about just giving yourself some time to just sit and to just be. So now that we're all here, we'll go ahead and start with the meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences, unfortunately. Anyone's mind race all day long, just thinking and thinking and thinking. This doesn't shut off your racing mind, okay? Don't judge your practice. We judge things all day long, what we look like, what we wear, what we eat. We're constantly in these judgment modes. And the practice of meditation is simply learning to get quiet and still and be with sensation of breath. Sounds, you'll hear them. Phones ring, people cough. Please, I say this every time, if you have to cough, don't hold it in. Almost every meditation I hear someone going, we can all hear that anyways. And then when you get up and you trek out, and you walk out, you go out, you close the door, and you cough loud in the bathroom, we can also hear that. And so I know you're doing it to try to not disrupt people, but I promise you, just sit and cough. That is natural, that is comfortable. That's what this practice is about. So don't feel like you have to hold your cough in. If anything, your cough just woke somebody up. So thank you for that. Posture. You just want to be comfortable. If you're on the cushions, often it helps slide into the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. Hands are on the knees or in the lap. If you're on the chairs or benches, also just trying to sit up straight. Shoulders relaxed. I will guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. and throughout the practice, you'll hear sounds. These are not distractions, not disruptions. Simply what's happening around us as we sit. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Gently guide the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. And as the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgment from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Where's your mind? Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, speech, quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. knowing with each breath there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, just as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. Most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, it's quiet, calm, still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit, hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than anyone in this room who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for every one of us in this room, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. more reactions. This is our life every day. The practice of meditation is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, and disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and every other person you encounter every moment of your life. That's why it's so simple. Just working on being kind to yourself and everybody else. We can all be nice to people, right? So easy. Sorry to waste your time here on a Saturday morning. You came all this way just to show up and be told be nice to people. How boring is that? I've found this practice to be extremely difficult. People often ask, someone just asked, I was talking to yesterday for some other thing, and they said, has anything ever happened to you from meditation? I said, no. You haven't had any, I don't even know what they were talking about. And I said, no. They're like, well, what do you do? I said, just sit. Well, and then what? Just sit more. It was, it's funny, I used to tell this story a lot, and I probably haven't told it in a couple of years. It just popped into my head. But years ago, I came across some random YouTube interview of someone who was doing research on a Zen temple, monastery somewhere in Asia. And they were interviewing everybody, not everybody, but a couple people who were there. And there was one Western kid, pretty young, and he was telling them the schedule. And the interviewer said, what time do you wake up every morning? And the guy said, 3:30 in the morning. And the interviewer said, why do you wake up at 3:30 in the morning? And the guy kind of laughed and smiled and said, I have no idea. It was really great. But I think that in and of itself and the practice of sitting is critical. Why sit? Why do nothing? Why not? The entire practice is based on neutralizing your karma. And by karma, I don't mean what you get or what you deserve. I may touch on that later, but just to touch on it briefly, karma is action. It's what we give. Body, speech, mind. What we think, what we say, and what we do is our karma. Karma has nothing to do with what you get. It has nothing to do with what you think you deserve or others deserve. Karma is not about deserving. Karma is a law of cause and effect. And if the practice of karma is simply, as the Buddha taught, generated by body, speech, and mind, what we think, what we say, and what we do, then you begin to understand why the practice of sitting and breathing is critical. Speech karma, when you sit quietly, is phenomenal because you're not saying anything. Physical karma, as far as moving, is phenomenal because you're just sitting. You're not causing physical harm to self or others. You're not stepping on anything or anyone. You're just sitting. And then you're left with the cause of all of our suffering, which is our mind. But when you sit with your mind, the mind that suffers and struggles and manipulates and confuses and gets lost and all those types of things, when you sit with that mind, that's the same mind that you actually go through your day with, which can be kind of scary. At least for me, I don't know about any of you. And so the practice of sitting with the mind is to recognize that when you sit silently and breathe for 5 minutes, 20 minutes, or 3 years, the mind that's a mess is still a mess, but at least you're not doing anything with it. And eventually, slowly, over a few lifetimes, your mind begins to maybe settle, maybe purify, maybe become a little more clear. But it's a practice. So for me, the question of why sit and do nothing, in my mind, it's like, why not? It's the most pure my karma can be in that moment. I don't look at sitting as, what am I going to get from this? Maybe one way to look at it is what am I not going to do while I'm sitting and breathing? And the answers there can be endless. Now, if you're one who does nothing but wonderful things all day long, then by all means, don't waste your time sitting. But if potentially you do harmful things to self or others, then taking a break and sitting for a while and using it as a training, not as an escape, but as a training to bring the mind back to the present moment. Sitting and breathing, all is well. Does that mean everything in the world is phenomenal? No, the world's a mess. Does that mean everything in your life is phenomenal? No, your life may be a mess. But sitting and breathing at that moment, all is well. And then with that mind that is a little more steady, a little more clear, a little less driven by greed and anger and ignorance, then we take that mind into the rest of the doing world, which is where we spend most of our time. Ultimately, the answer of why sit, you have to get to that conclusion on your own. But the only way we begin to understand why sit, and by sit I just mean doing a meditation, the only way we get to understand why sit, you get to that on your own. What I say is irrelevant, what some book says is irrelevant, what the Buddha said is irrelevant. You have to figure it out on your own. So, good luck with that. So I'll stop there. I'd much rather just respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that's on your mind. We'll go from there. Yes?
Can you talk about, besides Kuan Yin and the state Buddha, can you talk about the other objects on the altar behind you? Because I don't think I've ever learned about them.
Literally this behind me or that behind me?
No, I know that. Sorry, I mean the other directly behind you.
Directly behind me. So you have the emaciated Buddha, which you said you know, but for those who don't know, the brief story is that's the Buddha before he awakened. Right? I won't go into that whole long story now, even though it is one of my favorite. And I'm having to crave my desire to tell that whole story, but I know you've already heard that 6 times. So I'm going to honor your question. That's the emaciated Buddha prior to awakening. You have the incense bowl for offering incense. The incense is a really beautiful offering representing the teaching of impermanence, that we think of our lives as we have been lit and we're alive, and every moment we're one moment closer to becoming ash. So don't waste it. You have the bell, which I'm holding here, which sits over here. They all sit on 3 lotus flowers. The lotus, the yellow lotus, lotus specifically in Buddhist teachings, represents the mind coming out of the mud. So you have gross mud, and out of that blossoms a beautiful flower. And our mind often is in the mud. And from that gross mind can blossom a beautiful mind. Thus the expression, no mud, no lotus. Right? So those are the 3 lotus flowers holding them. This is a bell. A bell is used to start and stop meditation. It's used for rituals. It's used for chanting. It also sounds better than start and stop. And different traditions use bells differently, to call all bodhisattvas, dharma protectors, to use it as a moment of coming back to presence. That's why I like the coughing during meditation, and thank you to the person who coughed so beautifully. I loved that cough. My mind's funny. I almost and then when I heard a sneeze during meditation, I just go, who sneezed? I literally almost said during meditation, coughing's okay, but sneezing is not. Glad I didn't, but it went into my head. And so the bell brings you back to the present moment, which is why I like the coughing, because if you think of coughing not as something that distracts, but something that actually brings you back to the present moment, right? Then you have what's called a wooden fish right here. Also a very traditional Dharma instrument. It's a little kind of this wooden piece here. You can look at it closer. The wooden fish represents, in the water, the fish's eyes are always open. So it represents keeping the mind open, or the eyes always open, and the mind for that matter. But specifically, it's about keeping the eyes open, right? We have 3 little Ganesh statues that in 2008, when Dharma Bum Center became Dharma Bum Temple, we picked out 3 of us, little Ganesh statues. Ganesh represents destroyer of obstacles. And so it's a very special moment when kind of September 2008, Dharma Bum Temple became Dharma Bum Temple, right? There's a little tiny Buddha statue, little brass Buddha statue. The 1,000 arms represents kind of being able to help and heal in all directions. You have flowers that are offered also as a sign of impermanence. There's a little photo from Andrew, was my old friend from 2003 when I started at the Buddhist temple in Shifeng Temple, a phenomenal practitioner, and has photographed a majority of the big events we've had. He's also a great photographer. And so that was a gift of February 14th when we opened. He had a little photo and he wrote on it as a gift. And then there's a couple other statues. There's a Kuan Yin, the green jade one, which she hears all the suffering in the world, pours out compassion. There's a Perciva Lee statue where in the Thai forest tradition, you'll see, especially there'll be really large ones like at the Meta Forest. He was the wealthy individual who funded everything. That in the Thai tradition, you make offerings. He became very prominent for us when we were doing a capital campaign about 2.5 years ago to buy the place you're sitting in. As much as the Swedenborgs were wonderful people, they didn't want to give us the church for nothing. So we had a Perciva Lee statue that was placed on the shrine and continues to stay with us. What else? Oh, the Kusiti statue, little one holding a staff. He's the Bodhisattva. His vow, the Bodhisattva vow, right, is to be reborn life after life. That's the vow. To be reborn life after life, to liberate all beings from suffering. Right? If you're not into bodhisattvas, you don't know what that means, you're not into being reborn, just think about waking up every day and your entire agenda that day is to help people. That's the practice. That's it. Right? But his vow specifically was to be reborn into the hell realms. Not this human realm where everything's so wonderful and beautiful, but into the hell realm where things really are rough. That was his vow. To be reborn there over and over and over again until all beings are free from the hell realms, right? Little cups of water and rice, again, offerings. Yeah. Does that help? Yeah. And if you missed all that, we're streaming live to 1 million followers on YouTube, so you can pull it up on our YouTube channel and hit play. It's all there. Yeah. Right with your plug for why we're so great. Other questions? Meditation, Buddhist practice. Yeah.
So a yogi and a Buddhist, are those interchangeable words?
Oh, I thought you were starting a joke. So a yogi and a Buddhist walk into a bar.
Are those like interchangeable words?
No.
Kind of similar.
No.
Similar practices are
No.
different.
Totally different. Yeah, both beautiful, right? But 2 totally different things. Yoga, the word yoga means union. I'm not a yogi, let me start by saying that. So to all you yoga teachers or practitioners in here, there's my disclaimer, as I may potentially offend someone who is. Yoga means union. To my understanding, when the Buddha was alive, Siddhartha Gautama, the prince, and yoga was pretty big in India 2,500 years ago, right? And so it was a practice that they did prior to seated meditation, right? The bringing the mind and body connection together to then physically prepare yourself to sit is very critical. Often, if someone says, do you do yoga or do you do meditation or do you practice Buddhism? Their response is, especially in our culture we're in, well, I do yoga, right? Yoga is phenomenal, but it's not always meditative. It can be. It can also be very modern and westernized and expensive. And the Shavasana at the end, which is the meditative practice, right, can be very meditative and breathing in and breathing out. Or it can also be, yeah, I'm finally done with yoga. What do I have to go do next? So it depends on what mind you bring to yoga. It also depends on what mind you bring to driving. What mind you bring to standing in line at the grocery store. What mind you bring to conversations with family and friends and strangers. So everything can be a meditative Buddhist practice based on the mind we bring into it. Does that make sense? But yoga is yoga, meditation is meditation, Buddhist practice is Buddhist practice. They can all be integrated together very beautifully, and many people do that. And they can also be three completely separate things. Yeah. The word Buddha, as I referenced earlier briefly, but it literally just means the awakened one. So Siddhartha, he was the prince, he became called the Buddha. They just gave him that name because they realized he figured out the beautiful teaching. Would it be fair to say that he was a yogi? Probably, right? So, yeah, does that help clarify? Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I have a synonym question. Are wisdom and compassion the same thing?
Are wisdom and compassion the same thing? No. Not according to my ignorant understanding of Buddhist teachings. Lots of disclaimers today, but it just keeps me from, wisdom and compassion are, at least from the Buddhist lens, are often seen as the two wings of Buddhism. That you have and often you'll see Manjushri, right, which is what we have here, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, and then we have Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, right? One of the greatest teachings I got, and I actually got it literally from an old Zen master, where we got into an argument, and she accused me of having all compassion and no wisdom, and I accused her of having all wisdom and no compassion.
Who won that?
She was right, I was wrong, either way, regardless. But the understanding is that it takes both wisdom and compassion. There are moments in our lives where we have endless compassion for someone, but it's coming not from wisdom. Maybe coming from attachment, maybe coming from anger, maybe coming from control. But because we think we're pouring out our hearts to somebody, it's the snail story. Right? All compassion in the world for those snails, they don't get stepped on and killed. But all the ignorance and thinking that I knew what I was doing with them when I moved them. No wisdom, just compassion there, right? And then there's moments where you're filled with wisdom. I don't have any of those examples, and you lack compassion. So definitely not the same thing. Both kind of required as I think a motivation and inspiration to practice is to cultivate, right? Endless wisdom and endless compassion. And then the question is, Chuck has been stuck on, I don't think he's here this morning, but as Chuck, oh, you are here. There you go. As Chuck has been stuck on for the last couple of weeks about, well, we always talk about wisdom. What is wisdom? And my response is, we overcome ignorance with the practice of wisdom. So the Buddha praised Subhuti, his greatest disciple, for his discourse on wisdom. And Subhuti said nothing about wisdom. He said nothing at all. He was silent. And the Buddha said, great job. You understand wisdom, right? So for me, when I hear that teaching, I translate that in my life to understand that I don't know what ultimate wisdom is. But if wisdom is what we use to kind of overcome ignorance, I'm pretty aware of ignorance. When I do something that's driven by greed, anger, there's my ignorance, and I'm aware of that. Doesn't mean I always stop, but I'm aware of it. So I am lacking wisdom in that moment. To me, wisdom would be, don't be greedy, don't be angry, right? But I don't seek ultimate wisdom. I seek the ridding of greed and anger. I don't seek ultimate compassion, I seek the ridding of anger. And therefore you're left with, right? It's like the sun and the cloud metaphor. Have you heard that one? So does that make sense so far what I'm saying? So there's an expression in Buddhism, a phrase, bodhicitta, means Buddha nature. And the Buddhist teachings say that we all have bodhicitta, Buddha nature. We are all already awakened. We all have the same conditions that the Buddha had, right? Human, breathing, eating a little bit, sleeping a little bit, going to the bathroom, and dying. We all have those conditions, right? And what the Buddha said is that we have this awakening within us. It's not something we seek outside of us. But the metaphor is on a cloudy day. Is the sun there? Do you see it? Why not? The clouds are in the way, right? So once the clouds part, you're left with the sun. So the metaphor is that the clouds are greed, anger, ignorance. When those move away, we begin to experience and live from a place of bodhicitta, or Buddha nature. But as long as we're here thinking that this awakening is some place we have to go to, we miss it. But if we're here and we realize this is my greed, this is my anger, this is my ignorance, I want those to subside in part, sitting right here in this moment, not next week, not next life, not when I hit whatever age, not when I get everything I want, not when I win the lottery, not when everybody leaves me alone, not when the world does everything I want it to. But right now in the mess that you're in, can you look at greed, anger, ignorance, and work on removing those and awaken to your own Buddha nature? That's the practice. That makes sense? Yeah, go ahead here and then we'll go here. You're gonna say something? Hang on, one sec, go ahead.
I was going to ask if wisdom is relative.
Sure.
Because when I think about your snail story, I think about how you were using the tools that you had in that moment and what you thought was wisdom to use your compassion to save all the snails, right?
Well, wisdom can be relative, but relative doesn't mean justifying that at this moment I thought I had extreme wisdom.
But at that moment, you did think that you had wisdom.
And I was wrong. It's not relative.
It's not relative?
No, I mean, it was just plain ignorance. At that moment, I thought I had ultimate wisdom, and I was wrong. You see what I'm saying? Those are two different things. Is wisdom relative? Can be, yes. But the example you're giving at that moment, it's not about it being relative. It's about recognizing that I didn't have ultimate wisdom. Just because I thought I did doesn't make it wisdom.
So
That's actually the dangerous part. It makes it...
And then you're just justifying your behavior.
Right.
So could you give me an example of where wisdom is relative?
No.
My question is somewhat similar. How do you recognize that you're ignorant?
We're towards the end of class and we don't have enough time for that. I mean, it's pretty obvious if you stop.
Your snail story.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you know if that's not the right thing to do?
All I'd have to do is think, it's real obvious to me. All I'd have to do is stop and realize that I don't know what's best for anyone ever. The problem is when we begin to justify and think, well, I know what's best for them. Based on whose mind? Right? We don't know. We will convince ourselves that we know. Just because we've been taught it our whole lives, we'll think that we know. Just because, Google or Wikipedia says so, we think we know. I've taken the approach that I am always coming from and only coming from a place of ignorance. This is not about how smart we think we are. It's about recognizing that we're coming from a place of self. And as long as we're coming from a place of self, I think, I want, I need, this is what is best. Ignorance is there. I don't know anything about a snail's life, but somehow I thought I knew what was best for it. Him or her. Yeah, and then we'll close.
So you tie that in with ego.
Absolutely. Yeah, the ego, as the Buddha taught, for those who might be brand new, the root cause of our suffering is the sense of self. And that sense of self is that ego that says, I want this, I deserve this, I need this, why me, poor me, this shouldn't happen, I. That ego is what we've been building our entire lives. And it's become this wall that we think keeps us safe. And this practice is recognizing that that whole ego you've built is just a story that you've created from an unenlightened perspective, thinking that we know what's most important when we don't. Right? We are so like these tiny little things in this grand universe. But we wake up and think, what do my shoes look like? What does my hair look like? Does my shirt match my tie? You know? And from that place, we seek endless wisdom. We live in so much fear. You know, that's why, and I'll kind of close with this. That's why, and this is the first time that I've actually explained. I always say, if you need to cough, please cough. But in all the years I've been doing this, that's the first time I actually walked through that example. But the reason that something like that typically would have received so much laughter is because we all can relate to the fact that here we are in a room with 60, 70 people, and oh no, maybe we're afraid to cough. What are they going to think if I cough? Maybe I'm going to disrupt them if I cough. Maybe they'll think I'm a bad meditator if I cough. Maybe they'll think I'm sick. I mean, who knows? As opposed to just recognizing, you just need to cough. Just cough. But we live in so much fear. That's not wisdom. That's fear. And when you begin to look at the Heart Sutra, it talks about going beyond fear. Just Google Heart Sutra. It's too late to get into it now. It's about going beyond fear and learning to be comfortable in each moment as it is. Because we created that moment. You created that moment that you're in. Like it or not. You created the world that you're in. So, with that, we'll join palms. And the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. May we all be at peace. May we all be free from suffering.